share the live. Yes, we are on, Easy. How are you doing? We are live. Can you hear us? Can Easy hear us? Because I see there's a question on there saying we are live. To me, as I share the live, can you just tell us about? I know you were accompanying Makashule Gana
Yeah,
today. Can you just tell us what that was about?
sure. So it was I accompanied Ghana today as part of as he conducted oversight visits as part of his parliamentary constituency work. Parliament is in recess now, or what they call a constituency period. So, effectively, for these 2 weeks, members of parliament are conducting constituency work in their respective constituencies. And as you know, Ghana serves on the Portfolio Committee for Police as well as Transport and Human Settlement and various others. So he's a very, very busy man. But effectively, this is to create a feedback loop between National Assembly as well as as well as the service delivery touch points, which is obviously police stations. It's important that MPs get a sense of the true experience on the on in terms of how citizens engage certain public services, and oversight visits are an important component of understanding um, how South African citizens engage with public institutions, um, like police, like Home Affairs, or whatever a particular portfolio committee would be responsible for overseeing and whatever service it's responsible for providing to the public. But it was good, it was productive, but also these things can also be somewhat depressing sometimes, where you're confronted with some of the realities again. I though the two um, uh, stations that we went to, being Bramley and Alexandra, have communities within their policing area that are rife with some very, very serious contact crimes, like GBVF related crimes, murder, hijackings, and a bunch of other criminal offenses that are prevalent in those communities. And in Bramley, they break up a policing area into sectors. So they've broken it up into 4 sectors, and effectively they police this entire policing area with 2 reliable cars. And you realize that one of the reasons that South Africans can't get effective policing is because, one, there aren't resources at a station level. But secondly, even the detective capacity um, is very, very minimal. I mean, the head of detectives in the police station in Bramley was communicating to us that he effectively doesn't have sufficient manpower to be able to take cases to their necessary prosecutorial conclusions, which obviously has the horrible consequences, because it means you get people who commit crimes, and then they might be arrested, but ultimately, because the state isn't able to establish a strong enough case, they get let back into communities to just continue their tirades, which and then ultimately have communities taking matters into their own hands because they're just exhausted and fed up with these conditions. But yeah, that's the state of things. But we knew this when we started, and we said that we were going to, there's that safe part of our vision statement where we said the safe, prosperous, united, and equal South Africa. The safe part is important.
Absolutely. I mean, this is in addition to um, the same kind of visits that Ghana did somehow in the beginning of the year during the Wood 87 campaign. I remember going along with him. We also did 2 police stations. And like you said, the same experience. I think what I love about what we do is, we don't just go. If people are interested to see some of the speeches and sort of motions, or rather comments we have tabled in Parliament regarding this, you should go to our YouTube channel. You will see all our speeches, including the speeches that Ghana has given specifically around crime and policing, which I think have been quite instrumental. And I think his continued visits are going to be helpful Easy says on Twitter, we need to remove funds from the military budget and allocate the funds towards higher police pay. He also says our police are very understaffed and underpaid, and the morale is in the toilet. Absolutely. I mean, I remember during the time, the national chairperson Vuyo Saramokopa had gone to Alex to assist, the community policing forum in doing like sort of their rounds in the evenings, and that was pretty hectic. So
Yeah,
thank you for doing this. To me, you and Makashule Ghana. We love to see our votes going into the hard work. And I mean, you could choose to stay home and do nothing, but you're out there doing the actual work. And I think that's quite important. We've got almost 100 people online with us. Welcome. Good evening. I hope you're doing well. My name is Palelu Palaitile. I'm the digital manager at Rise Mzansi, and I'm joined by Boitumelo Mpakanyane, who is the head of internal democracy. So this is the third of our lives since we have launched the Rise Where You Are campaign. And this week, our focus has been about knowing your ward. Thank you for everyone who's commented on our post around knowing our ward. I know a leader who had to check her ward today on Facebook, which was really great because she didn't know what ward she was in. And we were able to assist her in going to the IEC website, and she found out what her ward number is and who her ward councillor is. So if you're on here and you're wondering where you can find out your ward, the IEC website is available if you're registered to vote. But we'll unpack that a little bit more. So, Demi, let's just reflect just on the campaign we've done. Register to Rise, we've done Register to Vote, and now we are on Know Your Ward. Let's just talk a little bit and recap a little bit on what Register to Rise is, just a little bit with Register to Vote, and then we'll go to Know Your Ward.
sure. So, I think the perhaps let me from a high level explain what the campaign as a whole seeks to achieve. But effectively, what we want to be able to do is get to a point where we have strong local organizing units across communities, across the country, that have an ability to serve their communities, right? What you saw in the past election was political parties that have what you call traditional branches and have a presence in traditional branches. In many instances, those branches fail to deliver the electoral performance that one would expect, especially if you look at some of the historical performance. And what we've come to understand as Rise Mzansi is that the issue here is that branches exist for themselves in communities rather than existing for communities, right? They are inward looking, they are navel gazing, they muse about internal dynamics, and they contest and fight for power and all of those things. But communities don't derive any value from the presence of a political party's branch in their community anymore. And what we're trying to do as Rise Mzansi is to be able to build strong local organizing units filled with volunteers of Rise Mzansi who genuinely love their communities and have come into the Rise Mzansi ecosystem, understanding that Rise isn't a vehicle for necessarily making a person's political ambitions come true. It is actually a vehicle for people who want to serve their communities and are looking for an avenue to be able to multiply their efforts. Because what often happens is that we want to get involved in the political process, we want to become more active citizens, but we're not necessarily sure how we can go about doing this. And so effectively what we want people to do and want this campaign to achieve is for people to understand, Jorge, they can use the Rise Mzansi exists as a vehicle specifically for using the organization as a vehicle for serving their communities. In terms of Rise, registered to Rise, it's obviously important that in order to be able to build these local organizing units, you need people to register to volunteer and become members of the organization. And this is important because we need to know who is where, who is in which voting district, who is in which ward, and who's in which community effectively, and who is doing the work. It's obviously also important that we are registered to vote, because in as much as we must exist to serve communities, the most effective way we can serve communities is through the efficient and accountable and adequate use of public power. So we must contest public power, and that's what political parties exist for, right? We exist as vehicles to use public power for the benefit of all South Africans. I think that principle has been perverted by politics as we've come to understand it, but ultimately it's for us to reframe. It's why we came into the political landscape. It's why many of us left our respective jobs in public benefit organizations, CBOs, business. Some of us come from politics, but it's effectively why we've all convened in this space, to be able to use this vehicle to serve our community, but ultimately to contest public power and win it, to be able to wield it for the benefit of all South Africans. And then now, obviously, the next component becomes, know your ward, and this one is critical. How? Because until you know your ward, I mean, remember, the objective here is to build local organizing units that have an ability to serve their communities and the needs of their voting districts and wards. But you can't do that if you don't know what the issues are. You can't do that if you haven't convened yourself around those issues, and you can't convene yourself around those issues until you have really done a deep dive into trying to fully understand them. So that's effectively what we're asking people to do. We're asking people to find out who their ward councillor is. We're asking people to get in touch with the community policing forum. We're asking people to volunteer where they can, and ultimately to put themselves into groupings in what we call powers of 8, which will be another step in the campaign. But once we have clustered people into VD level groups, we will then be able to say that you must you must go out and serve your ward, because now you have an understanding of what the issues are. So this exercise in this week's the aspect of this week's campaign is all about getting to understand your ward, getting to understand who your ward councillor is, understanding how your community policing forum works. If you want to get very into the details, you can go and check the integrated development plan of your municipality and whether or not it's being implemented at the ward level. So there's a couple of things that we effectively would like people to do at this stage of the campaign, but ultimately it's about understanding where their ward begins and where their ward ends, where their voting district begins and where their voting district ends, who their ward councillor is, and effectively the kind of practical aspects of what it means to be a citizen. And then obviously, like I said, after this will be locating people into local organizing units at a VD level, because I made this point in one of our earlier lives, how from VD to VD, it's important that we localize our organizing activities at a VD level, because what often happens, especially in your more urban settings, because we have this reality of apartheid era spatial planning, you can sometimes have an incredibly poor community and next to an incredibly affluent community with fundamentally different challenges existing in the same ward. We saw this in Ward 87, where in the same ward you've got Brixton with students whose needs are underserved in the same ward as Westcliff, so where some of the wealthiest South Africans live. So it's important that we organize ourselves at a VD level, so that we are in a position to be able to respond to the needs of our community at the most localized level possible. And it's obviously important that we mirror the existing structures of government. You don't want to go and where government has where the state is organized at a VD and ward level, you then ignore those things. You must be able to respond to those needs. So that's effectively what we're asking people to do, and what we've been asking people to do throughout the course of the campaign.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dumi. And I think one of the things we've been seeing through this past few weeks is a lot of people volunteering to become Rise Mzansi volunteers and also trying their best to do the work. And I think Easy is one of them, who says in the comments, "I'm hungry to run RM. It will be the best democratic socialist party in SA." And I think we need to show some gratitude to the work that's already ongoing. Yesterday, I was in one of our groups on Facebook Vote Rise Mzansi, and I saw a lot of people posting pictures of the work that they're doing, and I think it's important to commend that work. I just want us to go back and just help us understand what is a ward and who comes up with it, and why is it necessary for elections specifically.
Sure. So wards are effectively outlined by the Municipal Demarcation Board. And effectively, a ward is a geographic area where you'll have seats in council, and council is split between proportional representation seats and the seats occupied by ward councillors. So a ward is effectively a geographic area, which is effectively a local political constituency. And effectively, the idea is that you have a councillor existing in that ward whose responsibility it is to respond to the needs of that ward, but also to table the issues of that ward at a council level. You know what I mean? So we often make this assumption that a councillor's job is to respond to WhatsApp messages in our WhatsApp group. It's actually lazy leadership, is what that is, and it's a consequence of how low the bar has fallen. With some political parties that are celebrated for having good councillors, but really all they do is respond to WhatsApps. They're not proactive in how they, lead wards. But effectively, a ward councillor's responsibility and job is to meet the needs of the ward, but also, like I say, to champion the issues faced in a ward at a council level, and make sure that those things become a political priority at the council level. So we saw in the context of Ward 87, where there's a reservoir in the ward that is decaying along with other municipal infrastructure. And the councillor there, the councillor candidate, and even the councillor who's won will tell you that no, I stand there with City Power and Joburg Water while they're busy fixing the issues. It's like, Chief, we don't need people to that's 20% of the job. The other 80% of the job is making sure that this thing is on is high on the political and spending agenda, to make sure that these problems don't continue to persist. And I think at the point where we, as citizens and residents of wards, start to elevate the standard that we demand from our ward councillors, we'll get a strong sense of who's an effective ward councillor, who's an effective political party in the local government context, and who isn't.
Thank you, Dumi. So we know that now we have about 4,468 wards. I think that's of the last election. Are there changes in how the wards are structured, or could we expect more wards or less wards? Like how does that work?
So what effectively determines the parameters of a ward is the population of that ward, which is why you might have a situation where wards in provinces like Northern Cape and even some parts of the Western Cape that have relatively low populations span large geographic areas, but because they have very low population density. Whereas you'll find places like Alexandra where there's a small geographic space but has multiple wards in it. So it's more a consequence of how many people exist in a space, but wards don't necessarily shift and change that much, but like I said, the Municipal Demarcation Board ultimately makes those determinations. They shouldn't change particularly frequently. They're not necessarily set in stone. It is the purview of the Demarcation Board, but they shouldn't be changing and being in flux every now and then. But like I say, it's a consequence of population trends. And as you know, how we're experiencing a significant trend of rural-urban migration. So there could be some changes from that perspective, where it just becomes impossible for a single ward councillor to serve the needs of so many people. And as a consequence, it becomes necessary to break up the ward and perhaps introduce another one to slot in between this one and that one and all of those things. So these are some of the considerations that the Demarcation Board has to make when defining the parameters of wards. But it's effectively to make sure that you don't set ward councillors up for failure. just because they've got too many people to whose needs they must cater to. But yeah, that's effectively what the term means.
Talking about too many people, I'm sorry if you said this in the beginning, but do they talk about a limit of the number of people, or is it like an estimation of a range of what's reasonable?
Mm. I'm sure there is a limit. I'd be lying if I said I knew, but I can go and check, and I'll make sure I have the information for next time. But there's definitely a limit. It's the number isn't determined arbitrarily, so it's sitting somewhere there in policy. But yeah, I'm not particularly sure what exactly the limit is. And it could be a little bit of a little bit of a subjective test, but I'm not sure what the limit is, to be honest.
Yeah. No, it's
Mm,
okay. And I think also it speaks to, I mean, talking about like the number of people, it also
mm,
matters. I mean, you spoke about this a little bit. It also matters for a person to know that in my ward, it's
mm,
these different areas so that I'm able to understand the different dynamics of my ward and the different issues that this counselor might have to deal with. Because like you said, it's possible to be in the same ward but have different kind of issues because you're different
yeah.
geographical areas. I mean, we looked at Ward 87, as you made the example, where you had people from Parkview, and then you have
Mm,
the same area which is in Brixton and Auckland Park, and those people have really different geographical and just issues in their area.
No, big time. I mean, it's scary how many different communities you can have in uh, in uh, in one ward. I mean, just there in Douglasdale. I don't remember what the name of the community was, but there's an informal settlement there inside of Douglasdale, that hasn't had. I don't think I've in throughout the course of the campaign and even my work before Rise, I don't think I've seen a community with such neglected that has been as badly neglected as that informal settlement in Douglasdale was. I mean, we went to go and check with the province and the city when that settlement was proclaimed, and just to get a sense of what's holding up the provision of public services to that community. There's no roads, there's no formal, electricity infrastructure, there's no water, and those communities existed for over a decade, so there's no excuse. But it is, it's right there next to a very, very affluent community of Douglasdale, where there's houses that cost upwards of 5 million rand in the same ward. So this is the reality of South Africa, and it's the reality of this rural urban migration trend, because our cities have failed and because our government has failed to provide people with opportunities to live close to where they work. What you're going to have is a continued proliferation and a continued growth of informal settlements in various parts of urban communities, just because it's impossible for many people to exist and to live a 4-hour commute from where they live. It's got particularly painful consequences for single mothers who need to work to support small children, but now have to deal with a 3-hour commute to work and then 3-hour commute back home, also working a 12-hour shift. Because so there's these dynamics that inform these things. And it's part of why we framed our policy interventions the way we have. But it's important that as people who ultimately want to lead in our wards, we must understand what their needs are. And in fact, we must be deliberate to go and make sure that when we live in a ward where, even if we exist and occupy and live in an affluent part of our ward, we must do the work of going to make sure that those of us who have less in the ward are also catered for. So as part of this process of learning your ward and checking your ward counselor and doing all of these things to learn your ward, we also need you to go and find out what the issues are in some of the most challenged parts of your ward and the most underserved communities in your ward. Because without this, one of our principles is solidarity, and particularly social solidarity. Until those of us with privilege and those of us with power are willing to work to further the interests of those who have less than us, then we're failing. And as a political party, that's our first, last, and only job.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm,
I like that you end with that, because one of the things we continuously stated and said during the Ward 87 campaign with Malik Dessou was that
Mm,
we don't only need wards and communities that work, we need wards that are connected. We need,
mm,
because the issues are intersectional. And when you advocate for your ward, you need to be able to advocate for everyone that's living in your ward.
mm,
For everybody that just joined us, welcome again. Good evening. My name is Haupa Lelo Palaitile, and I'm live with Boitumelo Mpakanyane. And we are just unpacking this leg of the Rise Where You Are campaign, where we are essentially encouraging everyone who is not only registering as a Rise Mzansi volunteer ahead of the 2026 local government elections, to know your ward, to know where you're demarcated for election purposes. But like me to me just unpack now, we don't need you to just know your ward because of elections, but we need you to know your ward for community building and to understand the issues that face your ward, because we do see the need for South Africans to unite and come together and be connected in order to deal with the issues. Dume, one of the things we noticed during the national campaign, when we were campaigning around the country for elections, was the 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 fact that people really didn't know their ward, but more
mm,
so didn't know their ward councillor. And I just
mm.
want you to kind of talk about the dangers, or rather the loss in opportunity, when we not only don't know our ward, but when we don't know who our ward councillor is.
Yeah. No, the risks are massive, and I think mainly because, as I've framed in previous lives, and just, we speak about this a lot at Rise around our dream of fully taking advantage of this participatory democracy that we exist in. But this democracy only works for you if you use it. You know, I think often what we realize, or don't realize rather, is that a lot of the things that we are disgruntled with about politics, we have an opportunity to resolve through our ward councillors, and we have an ability and opportunity to hold our ward councillors accountable. But to the extent that we don't engage with our ward councillors, don't engage with political and governance structures to be able to, table some of those issues, then they'll never be tabled. But ultimately, the risk is that, if you continue to ignore politics, politics doesn't ignore you. Politics will use you, chew you, and spit you out if you don't take control of how, politics is going to interact with you. You must interact with politics proactively, and you lose the ability to be able to define the trajectory and the progress and the developments that happen in your community if you're not going to participate in the process. So, I know it's an annoying old trope and saying when people say, if you don't participate, you can't complain. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think there's in many instances people have very, very, good and personal reasons for not participating in the political process. But I think what can definitely be true is that if you don't participate, you lose your ability to be able to shape where your community, where your province, and where your country goes. So it's the risks are of not participating are far too big. The risks are that you leave politics and political leadership and governance to the least talented in our communities. And what we're trying to solve for is make sure that we have the most talented people amongst us leading us.
Yeah. I
Mm,
love that you say that also, because it made me think of, I'm not going to mention it, but there's a little sort of island not far from Cape Town,
mm,
but is part of the UK. But I think it's got like a population of like 2,000 people.
mm,
And what I've learned about it is, as much as it's racist-ish, I've learned that a lot of the work that goes into making it a community comes from the people. A lot of
mm,
the laws that they have and how they conduct themselves, it might seem boring. A lot of people talk about how politics is boring, but we are
mm,
talking about an issue where we're talking about a situation where our roads work, and we are part of the process of ensuring that our roads work. We're talking
mm,
about a situation where I'm a black woman, I'm a mom. Sometimes I'm alone in the house and I need to go get something at the shop. And sometimes when I take a walk, I'm told by these patrollers that keep your phone safe, somebody might take it. And I don't want to live in a society like that. I don't want to live in a society where I'm always scared that either I'm gonna get mugged, I'm gonna get killed, or I'm gonna get home and there's not gonna be power, or I'm gonna hit a pothole, all those kinds of things. And I think what we're trying to say here is to say that each and every one of us has a role to play and in our sphere of influence, right? Not
Yeah,
the whole country, that's overwhelming, right?
yeah.
And I think that's the core we are kind of calling, not kind of, but we are calling for, right, to me. It's that connectedness, that community. You spoke about certain issues that we are able, some of the political issues we complain about that can be solved at ward level. I'm interested to know, and I'm sure those who are listening are interested to know, because people, if someone doesn't know their ward and doesn't know their ward councillor, people obviously don't know what kind of issues they can deal with their ward councillor. Can you make an example of some of those issues?
Absolutely, but I think just before I get there, I heard a mentor of mine say to me that politics doesn't require you to be extraordinary. It just requires you to be courageous, and to have a little bit of courage to be able to like you say, try and influence the realities inside your sphere of influence. And that's effectively what we're asking people to be and do here, to be the best version of ourselves and to be the best version of yourself and serve your community in a way that's courageous. But I think the in terms of some of the issues that you are entirely entitled to take to your ward councillor, it is every local government issue, right? Just because if an issue impacts your ward, but perhaps is a bigger cooperative governance issue or intergovernmental relations issue, that's still something you can take to your ward councillor. Your ward councillor sits in council. Your ward councillor sits with other members of council and sits with mayors and MMCs in council often, and has an opportunity and ability to raise these issues. So I think what a lot of people assume is that, okay, well, my ward councillor is powerless to be able to resolve my community's municipal infrastructure issues. It is partly true in that your ward councillor can't single-handedly solve municipal infrastructure issues that plague your community. But the question you need to then ask is, has your ward councillor tabled these issues in council? And is your ward councillor being an activist enough in council and fighting hard enough in council to make sure that those things remain and become a priority for the council when it is making budget allocations and appropriations and deciding where it's going to spend money, right? Are you making is your ward councillor making sure that if you have if city power is specifically underserving your community, because we know that this is a reality in many instances, is your ward councillor doing the work to make sure that they platform those issues with city power? So it's not just issues of pothole, or there's my street light isn't working, or the street signs by the school have fallen down or have been stolen for scrap metal or whatever. It's sometimes bigger issues than that, right? It's sometimes bigger issues around when you raise issues about electricity and water, um because electricity and water issues are compromising your business and your ability to feed your family and all of these things. You can raise those issues with your ward councillor, and you can ask your ward councillor, what work have you done to make sure that in because the city of Joburg has an infrastructure renewal plan. What work have you done as my councillor to make sure that we are high on the priority list of that infrastructure renewal plan? So these are the you can effectively go to your ward councillor and hold them accountable for their work in respect of anything that plagues your local community. Of course, those things have to be within the competencies of local government. But even if they aren't, like I say, these are your ward councillor must then speak to an MMC, or speak to a counterpart in the provincial legislature if it's not a competency of council, and they must then come back and report to you. If you want to report an issue around the school, Yes, that's a provincial government competency, but then your ward councillor must come back to you and say, well, I was either able to get hold of the the MEC for education, or I wasn't. And if I wasn't, then this is what I'm going to try and do to resolve the issue. But your ward councillor is your immediate touch point with government and with governance. So you must use them for that purpose. And don't be shy and think, no, this isn't a local government issue. Every issue is a local government issue. It's your ward councillor's job to then escalate those things. I agree. This is why cooperative governance exists, and there are interfaces that facilitate cooperative governance across all spheres of government, local, provincial, and national. So it's your ward councillor's responsibility to 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 platform those issues for you.
And to me, do you think that the reason why we find ourselves in a situation where our communities service delivery is not working out, our communities are in disarray, and there's a lot that is needed to be done? Do you think, or rather that that is because people are not participating? I don't want to blame the people, but do you believe that it's because people are not participating in ensuring that their ward councillors remain accountable, so ward councillors just do what they can and remain in the shadows where nobody knows who they are and cannot keep them accountable?
No, it's absolutely because people are not participating. And those who do participate, is a very, very small group, and a lot of the people who participate to for themselves, you know. But ultimately, like I say, this thing can't work if you don't use it. And ultimately, like I said, we have a participatory democracy, and it is for you to, these people work for you, we work for you, we don't live off you. We must exist to serve you, as and even as unelected political parties, as political parties that are asking for your electoral support. What voters must do in the 2026 election is do an assessment of whether or not Rise Mzansi has the local organizing unit in Rise Mzansi has sufficiently served their community, and if it has, then you vote for us. But if we haven't, then you mustn't, right? But ultimately, the point here is that the until we expect and demand a higher standard of our local of local government, and in particular ward councillors and PR councillors and council, will never get a higher standard of governance. So it's up to us to demand those things. If you set the standard here for public governance and public representation, that's where the standard is going to be. But when you demand that the standard be elevated to meet your needs, then by virtue of the fact that you have the ability to put those people in that position, the standard must be raised. So it's up to us to take responsibility for the aspects, of which we don't require a high standard of public governance from our public representatives. If you don't, then they're going to give you what they feel you deserve. You must tell them what you deserve.
Yeah. Thank you
Mm.
so much for that. Deboho says in the comments, last mile politics, water, electricity, road safety, refuse collection, connected communities, these are all part of local government, which you've also said to me. I'm going to ask you two technical questions before we close. One, you said PR counselor. There might be
Mm.
people listening here who don't know what that is. And
Sure.
two, there's something you said in the beginning. You said voting district. How does that differ from a ward? Are those the same thing?
So let me start on the PR councillors. So like I said, your local government councils are split between proportional representation councillors and ward councillors. So in our system, we have a mixed system at local government level, and you effectively have two ballot papers in the local government election. One where you vote for a political party, and the political party, based on its candidate list, will then decide who it's going to send to represent you based on how many numbers, how many seats it wins proportionally in an election. So if there are 100 PR seats in a council, and a political party wins 20% of the vote, give or take, it should get 20 seats in 20 PR seats in council if it gets 20% of the proportional representation vote. But then ultimately it decides who it's going to send to represent you in council, because it is a closed list proportional representation system similar to the one that we have at provincial and national government. But then also there's the ward ballot paper, where you're still voting for a political party, but you know who the ward candidate is likely to be. So in this instance, you're voting for the person, and this person effectively is it serves you as a constituency, as a ward. The difference between a ward and a voting district is that voting districts effectively are a layer below wards, and you have voting districts inside of wards. So voting districts collectively make up a ward. I think the minimum amount of voting districts that you can have in a ward is 3, if I remember correctly, but I stand corrected. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. But there's also some there's some wards with as many as 6 or 7 VDs in them. So you effectively have a situation where your voting districts make up your ward and form as part of your ward, and the ward council is responsible for overseeing all of the voting districts within their ward. And obviously, the demarcation of voting districts is also done by demarcation boards in the city and all of those things.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of us learned a lot today. I just want to read another comment from Tebucho. He says, what we take for granted is that beyond service delivery, we have a chance to use municipal politics as a space for connecting and knowing each other. Connected communities that interact and build share meaning and experiences. This is the beyond service delivery expectation of local government leaders. I love that. And it made me think of something so small that happened when I moved to a new place in Soweto and I had just had a baby. I remember there was a tug of war between creating a park. So mothers were saying, we need a park. And when we moved here, we were told that there's going to be a park. And the dads were saying, we would love to have a park, but parks are used by drug dealers. They become drug dens. People use them to commit crime. So you had these two different perspectives, right? Because we were thinking of our kids get bored, they end up playing in the road, they get hit by cars. I think there were 2 kids who had been hit by a car. And these kind of connectedness helps us resolve these issues. You get to know the people in your community. You get to understand where people's perspectives are coming from and what is in the greater good of the community at the end of the day. Because it was my first time being so involved in a community level intervention to see what you would think that is not it's a non-issue, but it was a big issue because all the moms were saying our kids are getting hurt in the streets. We need a place for our children to play. And you had dads saying we were also coming from a good perspective because we've seen what parks have become. The conversation was what is in the best interest of the community and the children, and how do we become custodians of that park is created? Is it just going to be the municipality and the ward councillor, or are we all going to be participating in ensuring that park becomes what it becomes? And I felt very proud of myself for being part of that process. And to me, just lastly, I mean, people are listening, they have registered to rise or they want to register to rise, and maybe they are now finding out about their ward or their ward councillor. But what if they want to be ward councillors? What kind of work should they start doing? 2026 is around the corner. What does Rise in Mzansi, how do we choose those types of candidates? How do we come up with that kind of person? What should people prepare for to become ward councillors, or if they want to be?
So as you know, we define a criteria for candidate selection ahead of each election. Last year, what we did was because we've got some organizational principles around, making sure that the best among us lead, that we have public representatives who are accountable but to the people, and as a consequence chosen and selected by the people. We had an open candidate nomination process wherein any South African could nominate a person as their candidate. So effectively, the process of defining the candidate selection process for local government is still underway. But what I can absolutely tell you now for free is that one of the primary considerations in determining and assessing a potential candidate for public representative office is the extent to which they have served their community through Rise Mzansi as a vehicle. I can tell you now that if there isn't a a strong and a demonstrable history of serving your community through Rise Mzansi as a vehicle, then there's no chance. What we, one of the things that political parties have done, and unfortunately made a political and democratic practice in South Africa, is that they send the most talented and most committed leaders to the National Assembly and to provincial legislatures, but the standard at local government level is useless. It's rubbish, And what we need to be able to do is actually reverse that and say, where we need the greatest degree of love for communities, where we need the greatest degree of excellence, of expertise, of service excellence, because the issues are technical. Now it's water, it's infrastructure, it's refuse removals, all of these things. We need people who love their communities and people who have the expertise and the knowledge and a history of serving their communities. So like I said, we're still in the process of defining what the candidate selection process is going to look like and entail. But I can absolutely tell you now that our biggest consideration is going to be, have you been serving your community through this vehicle that we have provided you?
Thank you so much, Dumi, and thank you to all 337 of you for joining us tonight. Thank you to everybody who's made their comments. Thanks, Deboho, for all your comments. I just want to remind everybody who's here what Register to Rise is all about and what our sort of mission and vision as Rise Mzansi is. One of the things we've said is that we want to register to rise in order for our communities to be safe. I think that's one of the things we started with when we talked about Dumi and Makashwile Ghana being at police stations. We've seen how crime has increased and continuously increases in South Africa, and how our communities feel unsafe. That's one of the things that's very important to us. And one of the other things would be to build an economy that creates local jobs. People need jobs. People are unemployed. And we know someone who is, whether in our family, whether next door, whether in our community, we know how much people are struggling. And these things are possible is if we, as Dumi has said, elect or choose the representatives that care about these issues and want to see them happen. One of the other things that is very, very close to Rise Mzansi's heart and soul is to make sure that we put food on the tables of families and communities. People are hungry. People are sleeping without 3 meals a day. I think one of the things that our national leader, Osongezo Zibi, said during the national campaign was they would go to communities to speak to people, and people would say, I haven't eaten in 2 to 3 days. That cannot be acceptable. We need to do something about it, and we need leaders and representatives who want to make this type of thing happen. Another thing is to receive decent services. I think Dumi has drilled that down into us through this entire live service delivery. It's one of the things that is very important to us. We need our roads to work. We need our electricity. We need our water to work. We need these things. Some of these things are called basic service delivery, and it's our constitutional and our human right. And we need people who want to ensure that these things happen. We want to support single mothers. I think one of the things we talked about this a lot of the times during the election, and the facts have been put on the table that South Africa has a majority of single mothers, and they are heading their households and they are struggling. And we need to be able to be there to support them. And we need leaders who understand this. This doesn't mean that we don't care about single dads or child-headed household. It's connected to us because in our manifesto, we unpack this further, and we unpack, taking care of everyone. Another thing is we need to, this is very, very important as well. The last one is we need to make sure that your local council, legislature, and parliament are accountable to you. And I think what we've spent time doing in this live is talking about how important is participating in democracy and ensuring there's accountability. That's one of the things that we are disconnected from as South Africans, and we need to reconnect ourselves to. Otherwise, things are just not going to change. They're either going to get worse or stay the same. So if you believe in these 6 core missions and you want to make this happen, register to rise, be part of the movement, and come and join us in this. Tebogo also says local government is where life meets politics. We need the best to lead. Absolutely. Do you have any parting words before we close, or we good to go?
I don't think I can frame it better than Debza's last the last thing Debza said, I mean, I know he's been championing some critical local government issues really, really aggressively. Also, special shout out to people like Joshua and Letsolo, but in the comments. But yeah, it's like I said earlier, this democracy only works when we use it, and this particular layer of governance is the most important and needs to be exploited the most. Politicians exist for our exploitation, not for us to be exploited by them. We must use politicians. They must work for us. And ultimately, until we are able to make them do that, we'll never get we'll never be able to build the country we deserve.
Thank you so much, Boitumelo Mpakanyane. As always, you've been amazing. It's great to host you. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody. Please go to that Google form, go to that link and register to Rise and join the movement. Let's do this.